an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering the first 50 pages of So You Want to Be a Wizard by Diane Duane. In this episode, I'm introduced to a whole new world and a whole new method of performing magic, and I'm really interested. Thank you, Devin Matthews, for commissioning this episode, and I hope that you all enjoy. Welcome to Spoil Me. All right, so welcome everybody. Right now I'm doing this live on Crowdcast, and Devin is in the audience. He commissioned this episode. Some people will float what they are thinking about commissioning, and so I kind of have a sense of what's going to be coming down the pike. But Devin, I don't think that you ever mentioned this book before actually placing your order for the commission. So I had never heard of this. And Diane Duane is an author whose name I know, but I don't believe I've read anything by her before. So going into this, I didn't know what to expect, and I was a little startled when I looked up the book and saw how kind of childlike a lot of the covers were, because there's many versions of covers for this book, that once I started it, it felt more grown up and serious than I had expected. Which is why I guess they say don't judge a book by its cover. But sometimes that's what the cover's there for, to tell you what's in the book. So this episode, or this book actually, is available on Kindle Unlimited. So if you're a member of Kindle Unlimited, this is free to read. I started a free trial for 30 days so that I could get my hands on this book. But it's also on Kindle for $4. So if you aren't able to do Kindle Unlimited, it's really not expensive. Unlike some books I've been running into recently where the Kindle version is $2 more than the print version. I don't know why that is, but there it is. Devin is saying, I didn't warn you. I'm so sorry. It's fine. You don't have to warn me. I don't have a problem with doing it either way, letting me know first or not. Either way, they are both effective in me being unspoiled, because I don't look into things anyway. So, yeah, this first, so I've talked before about the kind of awkwardness of my commission description saying the first 50 pages, and that can be a really hard thing to gauge when you're doing an ebook. So, and I thought that I could do that with this book, but there are 400 pages to the print book, according to Amazon, and there are only 9 chapters, including the prologue. So one chapter, if you average that out, would be almost 50 pages. But I don't believe that the prologue is that long. So for this, I did the prologue and half of the next chapter, which I basically stopped reading right after their weird encounter with some dark thing that they can see over Manhattan, or under them while they're over Manhattan. And this is something that I'm going to need to ask Devin about. So Devin, I'm glad you're here, because I'm not certain whether or not I'm supposed to understand what happened there and if I missed it, or if it's supposed to be presented in a confusing way and will be explained later. Devin says, I have the original print and it's only 226 pages. I don't know. Yeah, I checked 2 different places actually, and they said 400. Maybe it's printed in large print for a different version of it. But maybe from here on we can do, you tell me specifically, a section that you believe to be about 50 pages. And that way, because it's hard for me to look into things too much without spoiling myself and, seeing names of chapters or plot threads or things like that being explained when people talk about page numbers. But yeah, this section took me roughly an hour to read, so I'm pretty confident it's about that long. And this was just so interesting because, Rashawn and I have covered Harry Potter, are covering Dresden Files, and we've talked about the difference in the ways magic is approached in those two works. Harry Potter, magic is very kind of easy. And I don't like to use that word, but it is, because all you really have to do is learn how to say something and learn a wand movement. And that's kind of all there is to it. And it can be hard to learn that, for sure. But it doesn't feel like this enormous taxing effort. In Dresden Files, it's much more difficult, and there's a lot more relation to physics. In that if he sucks a bunch of air out of a certain place in order to hold something up somewhere else, that means he's created a vacuum in that other place, and he has to deal with the consequences of that. Or if he sucks a bunch of heat from someplace in order to create fire, there will be a corresponding coldness left behind. Things like this. So there's a lot more in terms of consequences with magic in Dresden Files. And also, if you become overtired, you cannot perform magic anymore. Like, you have run out of steam until you rest. Harry Potter doesn't have that. They can perform magic until they fucking drop dead, basically. And it's as long as they have the strength to hold a wand. And even then, there is wandless magic. So, that's much simpler. In this book, it's a kind of, it's a little from column A, a little from column B, and some from column C, which I have not yet seen before, and which I think might be a little bit more common in other works, but I have, there's a lot unexplored for me in terms of fantasy and magic. So, the way that magic works in this universe so far is that you have, it's sort of like a recipe. And you get a list of symbols that are a basic language, but there are 400 of them. Unlike our simple 27 character based alphabet that we have, the speech, yes, Devin, the speech, which is what it's called, is meant to describe things in such detail that our speech would not be capable of, in order to be really targeting exactly what you want to do with your magic and exactly what part of something you want to target, because I imagine that things can get very, very specific here. And the first time that there is an actual spell wrought, they do a lot of writing and a lot of there's a lot of math involved, because the letters line up with number values and they have to make sure that it's properly balanced. And there's a lot of drawing of symbols. So this is a kind of magic, at least for them as beginners, that needs more accoutrement than, say, Harry Potter or Dresden Files. Dresden Files, he does use chalk circles and salt, things like that. But he can do stuff without that, and I'm not sure yet in this universe what you can accomplish without having these kinds of tools. So I find this really interesting, and I just wanted to talk about that right off the bat, because that's what really jumped out for me about this. And I'm going to back up a little bit now. So the prologue, I find it kind of funny that it's called the prologue, because it feels very plot relevant to me. Prologues to me usually are something that is a little bit of background info that maybe the other characters don't know about yet, and so you get a sneak peek into something, or it's a flashback way, way long ago, or a bookend when a character is telling a story and you get to see them in present day, and then the actual novel is jumping back in time. But this is all still from Nita's perspective, and the prologue is basically setting up that she is beaten up a lot. And there's a girl named Joanne who is her particular enemy. And Nita has a tendency to... the book opens with, "This is all because I can't keep my mouth shut." Which I can relate to. Nita, what's up? Hi. But the thing, and I really like this, that Nita isn't just a kid that's trying to keep her head down and stay out of trouble, and she's keeps getting targeted. She is a kid who is fed up, and she could keep her head down, but she's aware that that isn't going to matter. She's smart enough to know that, like, bully's going to bully. And it really doesn't have all that much to do with how she handles herself. That's not, like, the issue at hand when they come after her. So I like that she's got this sort of, like, understanding. It's frustrating to have that understanding and still be powerless, but I like that she is aware that this isn't her fault, that there's not anything in particular she could do except to totally change her personality, which is not an option for her, and mad respect for that. And I like the detail about the difference in the way that her family, like, reacts to it, because when she hides and finally manages to go home, her father always wants to know why she doesn't fight back. And she's just not... We all have our ways of dealing with conflict, and I like to think that if somebody tried to physically harm me, that I would go ape. But I'm not sure of that. I've never been put in that position. And she tends to freeze up until they go so far with it that she gets enraged. But by then, she's already been hurt so badly that she can't fight well. So her father has, like, you know, tried to pay for her to go to self-defense classes and stuff like that. And it just doesn't really help. So he's feeling frustrated because, you know, he worries about her and he wants her to do okay. And I think that part of him wonders that maybe she isn't fighting back because she thinks she's going to get in trouble. And he's trying to, like, let her know, I won't get you in trouble. I wish you would beat them up. But the way that the ritual of her coming home injured, him asking why she didn't fight back, her responding that she tried but it didn't work, is so played out that she is very well aware by now that she wouldn't get in trouble if she fought back. That's not the issue. And getting jumped by 6 kids, even if you did fight back, what would that do? Like, really? It would just prolong everything, right? So this dynamic between her and her dad and her mother, who is just tries to kind of roll with it and treat her when she comes home. It's sort of a strange thing. You know, her mom is almost like passive about it or taking it in stride as if it's inevitable, which I'm not sure about that as a reaction either. But as a parent, when your kid gets beat up, I don't know what I'd do. You know, it is adding fuel to the fire if you go and talk to the other parents, because then your kids are going to know that one of them snitched on the other, and we know what happens to snitches. Although it seems like she's getting stitches anyway, so I don't know. So I just wanted to talk about Nita's relationship with her parents. And also, her name is Juanita, so I had assumed that she was Hispanic. There's not a lot of background on that yet. But also, the kid that she runs into, who is also practicing magic in the woods, Kit, is definitely has an accent, and is either himself an immigrant or like first generation of immigrants and is still, but I'll enjoy that diversity here. So that's cool. Devin's saying, I think my favorite part of the interaction between her and her father is him asking her if she could possibly be more like the bully before stopping himself, realizing what he was saying. Yeah, you know, it's something that we all struggle with, is how to fight back and like keep our dignity without turning into the exact thing that we hate, which has been a huge issue lately in the news. But which I think that we could be way more aggressive on and still be totally morally correct than we have been. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So, she's running from Joanne, who came to her asking her, like, what do you think of my new bike? And Nita did not give her the fawning answer that Joanne expected, and, in fact, snapped at her about something vague. She says, I told her what I thought of her rather than her bike, and then has to run. And she winds up hiding out in the library, which is open late on Saturdays. And she goes downstairs while the librarian, because it's a probably multi-level, actually, library that used to be a private home. So there's a basement, and that's where the kids' library is. And she goes down there while the librarian holds off the bullies, because she is very familiar with their behavior, apparently, and knows that Nita gets beat up, and so is prepared to deal with this kind of shit. And Nita, while hidden out down there, is walking through and looking at the books, and she is old enough now that while this section isn't necessarily geared towards her anymore, she still loves it, and she's, like, so familiar with it that when one book shows up that she has never seen before, it's very jarring, because she knows every volume in this section backwards and forwards. And this is something that kind of touched my heart a little bit, because it reminded me of something I had long forgotten, which was in Connecticut, in Hamden, there is a library called the Miller Library. And I don't know how many of you have lived in various places and checked out different libraries, but they are wildly different. And it's kind of startling as a kid to get used to the library in your town and then move somewhere else and find out how vastly different that one is, how different the services are that they offer, the selection, the setup of the building. And Miller Library had a really cool children's section that was kind of a sunken level. It wasn't actually a basement, but it was lower. And you'd walk down into it, and there were like these huge like vines that they had carved into the wood that hung down. And it was just meant to feel really enclosed and cozy and comforting. And I was obsessed with this. And even when I got a little too old to be over there, I would definitely find reasons to hang out in the children's sections because it was just so cool. And this is the kind of thing that I feel really bummed about sometimes, that as adults, we act like that kind of thing is too childish. And so the adult section of the library is just fucking corporate looking. Like, it's not really corporate looking, but in comparison to the children's section, there's no wonder to it. There's no imagination about it. There's no effort to make it look or feel a certain way beyond purely functional. And I think that is such a shame. I think that many more adults than admit it would be delighted to sit in a reading nook like the ones in the children's section. And you know, we just feel like we shouldn't ask for that or want that or miss that. And it's nonsense, and I hate it. And anyway, I loved that section, and her describing, like, knowing every book down here felt really real to me. And Devin, yeah, he's saying checking out the library is the best part of going somewhere new. It can be the best part, and it can also be a huge disappointment. Like the library here in Denison it's real small, and there's not a lot going on. And so sometimes you're just like, oh, right. But then, you know, the Philadelphia library, holy shit. But anyway, so she's hiding out down there, and she runs across a book from a series that is, they all start with, so you want to be a blank. And it's, you know, be a pilot, be an astronaut, be a doctor, be a teacher. And they are all supposed to be sort of informational for kids about how to take their first steps and be, like, joining a career that they are interested in. And this one is, so you want to be a wizard. And she sees it and doesn't recognize it and thinks that it must be a joke, and pulls it off the shelf, and she starts reading it because, as a bookworm, that's what you do when you're left alone with literally anything legible. You read it. You can't... It's like... I think most people probably know, if you are old enough that you were around before cell phones were a thing, that even being in the bathroom, you would, like, pick up a shampoo bottle. Or, like, literally anything that was to hand, and just read the back of it because you just needed to be reading and you were sitting, and what else are you supposed to do? Now we have phones, and we wind up spending twice as much time in the bathroom unintentionally because we completely lose track of the fact that we are done now. But, yeah, the the back of the shampoo bottle, that was a thing. Back of the cereal box for me as a kid at breakfast time, sitting at the table, I would just read the fucking back of the cereal box 11 times. So yeah, she's sitting there and starts reading it, And there is the text at the beginning is saying how like the fact that you were able to find this book in the first place means that you have the tendencies of a wizard, and that there are certain things that you need to have mentally as personality traits, really, in order to become a wizard. And you don't have to have all of the ones that are listed here. Even some of them are oftentimes enough to become quite competent. So I have a question on this, and again, this is something that might be answered later, but she opens the book and there is like the writing inside of the librarian who put the book up. And I'm wondering what that means. Is the librarian also a wizard because she was able to see the book to write in it? Is the book visible to everybody but just not legible? Or does it look like it's about something else to people who aren't wizards? I don't know, because her sister, she drops it in the hallway when she gets home later, and her sister hands it to her and it's like, oh, so you're going to be a magician now? And I'm like, okay, is that because everybody can read it? Or does her sister have the same sort of tendencies that she does? So yeah, I have a lot of questions about what it means and how this book works, because there's definitely something specifically magical about the book because it snags on her fingernail. Like there's a thread from the binding that grabs at her as she's passing her hands over it and makes her stop and look at the title of it. And when she talks to Kit later, he had the same experience, that he said that he was like looking through the books in an antique store and it like got caught, and that was what caused him to check it out. Devin saying, I don't think that's ever addressed about the librarian. Some of what you're asking is definitely spoilery. Ooh, okay. Interesting. So she takes this book home, does the whole song and dance with her parents about getting beat up. Her mom has her go lay down and brings her dinner. I like the description of her mom too. Her mom is like she's super graceful and just has this elegance about her, and is really, and also apparently likes to cook, because when Nita comes in, she smells her mother's like, amazing cooking, and that's how it's described. So this is something that I guess she's come to expect. And I have to say, in some ways, it's kind of nice, excuse me, to be reading something about a character that has a somewhat stable home life. Just because there is so much that I have covered, books and television alike, where characters come from a really bad situation, or people are not supportive of them, or they don't have they just don't have a support system in general. And while things aren't great, like Nita is very frustrated with the way her parents react to what's going on with her and Joanne. They care. They're asking about it. They're trying to help, and they just don't really know what to do. And her relationship with her sister is really good. So it's just kind of nice to have that, because I feel like that can be, I don't want to say overlooked because it's purposeful, but I feel like it can become such a trope that we mine somebody's past that's full of heartbreak and misery in order to get character development. And while that's a completely legitimate and true thing, there are also people out there who have very complex characters, and they are people who come from stable, happy homes, mostly. So I feel like we can treat human beings sometimes as if not having a lot of pain in their background keeps them from being interesting. And I don't think that's fair. And that's not to say that Nita doesn't have pain, because she has kids beating her up all the time and lives in constant fear. So she has her own thing, and it's just, we all have our own thing. And sometimes our homes are, better than average, and it still happens. So I appreciate this. She winds up, because she's laying there after eating dinner and after talking to her dad, and she is thinking about what she, like, I really like Nita's sense of reason here, because she first thinks about, like, trying to get her pen back. She has a pen that I think she said was given to her by her grandfather. That's like an astronaut's pen that'll write upside down and it'll write on glass and whatever. And it got taken probably by somebody after this last fight. And she's thinking about, like, if I could use a spell to get my pen back. And then she thinks, I'm not sure, because the way the magic is described in this book sounds really serious, and maybe I'm not supposed to use the magic for petty, stupid little things like getting a pen back. She still does it later when she meets up with Kit. That's still part of the spell that they try and cast together. But I like that she's thinking in these kinds of terms and aware that her perspective is very limited. Devin is saying, honestly, this is one of the reasons I picked this book. With everything going on in real life and the intensity of Parable of the Sower, I thought it would be nice to share something heart-healthy. That is fair, Devin, and I appreciate your consideration on that front. Because, yeah, sometimes you just need to, refill the tank a little bit. So she reads through some different, like, introductory stuff and then finally decides that she's going to take the oath. And she takes the oath and then falls asleep. And there's this, and I'm going to try and find the notes section here. Okay. I'm trying to find if weird things start happening, no one will see them here. So that's a little bit further on. She has this weird sort of dream. So I'm going to read this. After a while, night was not night anymore. And it goes right into this section with no sort of, this is in italics, so I know that this is probably a dream. Or she felt herself falling asleep. It's sort of implied because it says she would have a nap and then later she'd get up and take the telescope out back. But right now, ellipses. Right now, ellipses. New paragraph. After a while, night was not night anymore. That was what brought Nita to the window much later. She leaned on the sill and gazed out in calm wonder at her backyard, which didn't look quite the same as usual. A blaze of undying morning lay over everything. Bushes and trees cast light instead of shadow, and she could see the wind. Standing in the ivy under her window, she turned her eyes up to the silver glowing sky to get used to the brilliance. How about that, she said. The backyard's here, too. Next to her, the lesser brilliance that gazed up at that same sky shrugged slightly. Of course it is, it said. This is Time Heart, after all. Yes, Nita said anxiously, as they passed across the yard and out into the bright shadow of the steel and crystal towers. But did I do it right? Her companion shrugged again. Go find out, it said, and glanced up again. Nita wasn't sure she wanted to follow the glance. Once she had looked up and seen. I dreamed you were gone, she said suddenly. The magic stayed, but you went away. She hurt inside, enough to cry, but her companion flickered with laughter. No one ever goes away forever, it said, especially not here. Nita looked up then, into the bright morning and the brighter shadows. The day went on and would not end. The sky blazed now like molten silver. And then she wakes up. So this is a lot right here. Like, so much going on. Time Heart is described in a later section very, very briefly. But she here is like in a familiar place that isn't familiar. There's a lot of opposites happening where she like can see shadows that are actually brighter than the darkness around them. Like it's the opposite. The sky, when she says undying morning, so I'm imagining that means it doesn't ever go down, that this is how it looks here all the time. She can see the wind, I just what does that even mean? And there is this companion. The lesser brilliance that gazed up at that same sky shrugged slightly. What is that? And not only is this brilliance like an actual being of some kind that can talk and move, but then she says, I dreamed you were gone. The magic stayed, but you went away. So this is something that she either knows already or is going to know, and in this dream, it's as if she already does. Like there's an overlap of time somehow happening, which is really interesting, and I don't know what to think of that, you know? But yeah, it's an interesting moment because it's suddenly like you jump ahead in time almost, where this is Anita who's much more experienced, who knows a lot more, who understands what's happening when she's here. But when she wakes up, she's Nita that we know. And none of that applies anymore. And I'm just really interested in what that means. And when she winds up waking up and deciding that she's going to go and study, I like the description. She found herself not just reading after a while, but studying, cramming the facts into her head with that particular mental stomp she used when she knew she was going to have to know something by heart. I like that description because, you know, you forget about that as an adult when you don't have to memorize things for school anymore, what that was like. And also, even adults up until not long ago still had to memorize phone numbers and all kinds of stuff. And now the internet is right there and you don't need to memorize fucking anything anymore. It's all immediately at your fingertips. So it's a skill that I feel like we don't use as much as grown-ups when we're not in school, you know? And then she starts reading about all of these, and I love the descriptions about what she's learning. She read about the hierarchy of practicing wizards. Her book listed only those practicing in the US and Canada, though wizards were working everywhere in the world. She scanned down the listing for the New York area, noticing the presence of advisory wizards, area supervisors, senior wizards. And I should mention that she's in the book when she wakes up, and she's listed as like a novice pre-rating, which I guess there's a star rating, like a Yelp page. That would be really funny. She doesn't mention that here, but pre-rating makes me think that. She learned the horseman's word, which gets the attention of any member of the genus Equus, even the zebras. She read on, finding out how to bridle the nightmare and learning what questions to ask the transcendent pig should she meet him. She read about the tree's battle, who fought in it, who won it, and why. She read about Time Heart, the unreal and eternal realm where the places and things people remember affectionately are preserved as they remember them forever. And in the middle of the description of things preserved in their fullest beauty forever and still growing, Nita found herself feeling a faint tingle of unease. So this is part of what ties into me thinking that that was a time jump somehow in her head while she was dreaming, because this flicker of unease seems like it's tapping into a deep memory of some kind that she's not even quite aware of yet, but knows is there. Almost like a past life type thing, or, you know, I don't know how to describe that, but I'm just very interested in that. So at this point, she's reading and they give her like her first instructions on how to practice magic. And that she needs to sit and look at something and really see it. And she's in the middle of doing it, and all of a sudden she hears a tree. And this was so funny to me, because I don't know what I expected. If you can hear a tree, you know, there are various tree spirits and entities in different books, and the one that everybody remembers are the Ents from Lord of the Rings, which speak super slowly and don't have a real, like, understanding of what time is like for mortals because they live so much longer. But this is a tree that's just fucking irritated. This tree is done with their human bullshit of them coming in and, like, fucking shit up. And I guess the thrust of this tree's irritation is that trees create patterns and artwork with their fallen leaves, and then humans come in and just fuck it up. They move shit aside, they rake, which her father asked her to rake the next day, so I'm wondering how that's going to go for her. But yeah, this tree is like, we've been working at this for like 30 years, and you guys just can't keep your hands to yourself. And then the tree mentions the other wizard that did the same thing the other day. And she's like, I'm sorry, what? What are you talking about? And the tree describes this boy, and she like runs to another secret place. And I'm a little unclear about how she knew exactly where to go to find this kid, but at the moment that's not really too important to me. But she winds up finding Kit, who is another kid who is being harassed and beat up because he is Hispanic and has an accent and is just different. And also he has been jumped ahead in school like a year or two, which is also really harming the way that he interacts because he's smaller than everybody that in his grade. And that's something that when you think back to the difference between what you looked like when you were in 6th grade versus what you looked like in 8th grade, jumping a kid ahead a year or 2 years, it does make an enormous amount of difference in terms of like their social standing, simply because of their development. So I really felt for Kit. That's tough. And Kit describes how he created like a protective shield for himself. So when these kids came at him in the woods, they weren't able to harm him. And he says something like, they thought they were missing me with their BB guns on purpose. To which I'm like, what fucking psychopathic children are shooting other kids with BB guns? Like, that still breaks the skin, right? Am I wrong? BB guns are used to kill squirrels, birds. They're not something to be fucked with. So these kids are trying to shoot this boy. What the fuck is wrong with people? Ugh, I hate kids. I never want any. What a disaster. So, alright, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm sorry. But she kind of has like an immediate kinship with him. Not just because of the wizard thing, but because of the fact that they both like the spells that they both want to try out right away are spells about how to protect yourself, not be noticed, not be beaten up or harassed, which is really fucking depressing, to be honest. But yeah, I think I can understand that. It's actually kind of funny. Those of you who listen to the Overdue podcast, they are doing a special series called Stop Homer Time, in which they read a newer translation of the Odyssey. And it's apparently the first translation ever done by a woman. And one of the episodes I was listening to yesterday describes how I think Athena pours a fog around Ulysses as he walks into this certain town to keep like nasty comments away from him, because the town is kind of predisposed to not like foreigners or strangers. And so I was thinking about this while I was reading this section, because I'm just like, well, you guys really just need to get on Athena's good side and she will help you out with all of this. So they are working in cahoots now to try and cast this spell. Kit has not been having any luck with it on his own. And he decides that maybe if she adds herself to this spell, and she has to do it herself, she has to write her name her way, and then he checks up on it because they have to make sure that the spell is balanced in the way that it's written, that maybe they will get this to work. So this is an interesting moment. They do the whole thing in terms of like the writing and the drawing on the ground in the dirt, and then he begins to read the spell. And I like the description of this a lot. This is something, I've said before that I'm a big fan of the way that magic is used in Dresden Files, because I always like when there are equal and opposite reactions and consequences to doing something huge to the physical world around you. This is a different thing where there is a more mystical feeling to what's happening as they cast the spell. So you get the sense that there's a consequence of some kind happening somewhere. It's not as cut and dried as like a physical thing, but it says let's see. Nita had never heard a voice speaking a spell aloud before, and the effect was strange. Ever so slightly, ever so slowly, things began to change around her. The tree-sheltered quiet grew quieter. The cool light that filtered through the canopy of branches grew expectant, fringed with secrecy the way things seen through the edge of a lens are fringed with rainbows. Nita began to feel as if she was caught in the moment between a very vivid dream and the awakening from it. There was that feeling of living in a body, of being aware of familiar surroundings and the realities of the daylight world waiting to be resumed, yet at the same time seeing those surroundings differently, colored with another sort of light, another kind of time. On one level, Nita heard Kit reciting a string of polysyllables that should have been meaningless to her, words for symbols, pieces of words, babble. Yet she could also hear Kit talking, saying casually, and it seemed in English, "We need to know something, and we suggest this particular method of finding the information." And the words didn't break the expectancy, the listening silence. For once, for the first time, the dream was real while Nita was awake. Power stirred in the air around her and waited for her to shape it. So yeah, I think that is pretty cool. I think that's a really neat description of it. And they wind up, it says, the equation stretched and coiled, and I like that too. It's called the equation, and caught those powers within itself as the words wove it. Nita and Kit were caught in it too. To Nita, it seemed as if, without moving, she held out her hands and they were taken by Kit and by the spell itself, and by the ponderous powers caught across from her in the dance. There was a pause. Kit looked across the diagrams at her. Nita scowled at the symbols beside her and began to read them. And it describes how, at first, there's this pressure as she begins to read and she gets a little scared, and then she realizes that the pressure is the spell protecting her and, like, wrapping around her, and that this is what she wanted. And let's see. Nita did her best to make a clear image of the pen as she spoke. I love the fact she's still trying to get this pen back. She hardly had time to wonder at the harmony their paired voices made before things began to change again. The shadow of the trees around them seemed to grow darker. The aura of expectancy grew sharp enough to taste. The silence became total, and their voices fell into it as into a great depth. Now, here comes the thing that I'm not totally clear on. The completed spell took effect. Nita had thought she would gradually begin to see something, the way things had changed gradually in the grove. The spell, though, had its own ideas. Quick as a gasp, it slammed them both out of one moment and into another, a shocking, wrenching transition like dreaming that you've fallen out of bed. Instinctively, they both hung onto the spell as if onto a railing, clutching it until their surroundings steadied down. The darkness had been replaced by a lowering, sullen-feeling gloom. They looked down, as if from a high balcony, onto a shadowed island prisoned between chill rivers and studded with sharp spikes of iron and cold stone. "Manhattan?" Kit asked anxiously, without words. Nita felt frozen in place like a statue and couldn't turn to answer him. The spell was holding her immobile. "It looks like Manhattan," she said, feeling just as uneasy. But what's my pen doing there?" Kit would have shaken his head if he could have. "I don't get it. What's wrong here? This is New York City, but it never looked this awful, this dirty and nasty," and he trailed off in confusion and dismay. Nita looked around her. It was hard to make out anything on the island. There was a murky pall over the city that seemed more than just fog. There was hardly any traffic that she could see, and almost no light. In fact, all of Manhattan in all of Manhattan, there were only 2 light sources. In one place on the island, the East 50s, it looked like, a small point of brittle light seemed to pulse right through steel and stone, throbbing dully like a sown seed of wildfire waiting to explode. The pulses were irregular and distressing, and the light was painful to look at. Some blocks to the south, well into the financial district near a south end of the island, another fire burned, a clear white spark like a sunseed, beating regularly as a heart. It was consoling, but it was very small. And then she feels something, malevolent and alive, that lay in wait below, a something that saw them, was conscious of them, and was darkly pleased. And this thing begins to come at them. So I'm trying to get a mental picture here of what exactly... First of all, I had thought they were in New York already. So when she says, "What is my pen doing there?" I thought they lived in Manhattan. Do they live in, like, Brooklyn or something? Did I miss that? But whatever the case, my mental picture is that they are, like, in the sky looking down at it as if from, you know, a helicopter or something. And they're seeing a different version of Manhattan than what's actually there. A version that contains information about energies or magic. And I'm curious as to whether or not it's a symbol of, like, something going on in the city. Is there another wizard? An unlisted wizard? Unlisted wizard is a really good, like, band name or book name. That's doing somebody who's doing something in Manhattan that's drawing dark energy to them. Is the thing that sees them and starts to come after them its own entity, or is it something sent by another wizard? Because the wizard's oath, which she takes and which leads to her, you know, beginning to read and discover all of this, it's about preserving life. The way the book describes it is that we know that entropy is real, that the world is winding down and will die. But the point of wizards is to preserve what life there is as long as we can and prolong the life of the world. So it makes it sound like that's what all wizards are here to do. But there is no way in hell that all wizards actually abide by this oath. There's no way. So there has to be somebody, like, the whole point of this is for life. There has to be somebody who's twisting it and turning it around somewhere. And is that what they're sensing here? Which is the way it's described. Like, it's one thing to hear, oh, there's somebody out there doing bad shit. But to see it in terms of its sheer size, like, if it is what I'm thinking and it's something like that, the fact that the spell is like, oh, well, in order to show you what's going on, we're going to have to pull back so far that it's like you're looking at this from a plane. That is a lot to deal with. That's a huge amount of energy. And you needing to reframe and change the ratio of one thing to another to that extent in order for you to comprehend it, that's really scary. That's like, yeah, no thank you. Devin says something like that, all wizards have one enemy, and enemy is still not the right word, I think. Interesting. So, yeah, and you know, I'm not sure what this result is in response to them trying to, like, be protected and find her pen. This doesn't exactly feel like it's related, but it has to be somehow, or else I don't think it would have worked this way. So they start to realize that they are wildly out of their depth here, and that this thing that's coming at them is gonna get them unless they do something to alter the spell. The spell that they've got going is not enough to protect them. And Kit starts like leafing through mentally all of the spells that he can think of to try and figure out how they can defend themselves. And she can see his thoughts, which is really cool. Like this whole idea of them being tied together by this spell, and they're tied together mentally too. So as he's thinking of things, she can see what he's like thinking through and is able to tell him, stop, go back one. Like he's flipping through a, series of pages in a book, which really does cut down on the amount of communicating that they have to do. It's much faster this way. And she says, look, it says if you've gotten imbalanced, you can open out your side of the spell to attract some more power. And he kind of tries to argue for a second that like, well, we don't know that's going to work. And she's like, if we do nothing, this thing is going to get us. So we may as well try it. So he pushes through to open a hole in this spell. And it's like a torrent, like a tornado outside of it. And they can only open a hole so big, and whatever is outside of it whipping around in the air like it's caught in a tornado, only something the size of the hole that they have opened will be able to get through, which is such a bizarre concept. It's so weird. Like, there's just, it's, I've never read anything like that before in terms of describing how magic works. Like, that there's just sort of a no man's land of a storm of magic and creatures and something out there, and you just break a hole through the spell you've got and let in whatever. And I feel like that seems really, really dangerous, but like she says, they don't really have another option, so what else are they gonna do? So that's what they do. And finally, this thing gets in, and this is it's so weird. I know I keep reading sections, but it's hard to describe this stuff without, let's see. It's like moving through a room full of people, every one of whom tries to catch your eye and tell you the most important thing that ever happened to him. Nita found herself deluged in fragments of sights and sounds and tastes and feelings and thoughts not her own, a madly coexisting maelstrom of imageries from other universes, other Earths, other times. Most of them she managed to shut out by squeezing her mind shut like eyes and hanging on to the spell. She sensed that Kit was doing the same and that their stalker was momentarily as bewildered as they were by what was happening. The whirling confusion seemed to be funneling through the hole in the spell like water going down a drain. Things, concepts, creatures too large or too small for the hole fell through it or past it or around it. But sooner or later, something just the right size would catch. Something, hopefully we get something useful, Nita thought. Something bigger than that thing, anyway. And thump. Something fitted into the hole with snug precision, and the crazy whirling died away, and the two of them had company in the spell web. Something small, Nita felt. Very small. Too small. But no, it was big, too. Confused, she reached out to Kit. Is that it? Can we get out now? Before that, what's-its-name? The what's-its-name shook itself with a ripple of rage and hunger that Kit and Nita could feel even at a distance. It headed toward them again quickly, done playing with them. Uh-oh, Kit said. Let's get out of here. What in the... said a voice that neither of them recognized. Out, Kit said, and hooked the spell into the added power that the newcomer provided and pulled. Plain, pale daylight came down around them, heavy as a collapsed tent. Gravity yanked at them. Kit fell over sideways and lay there, panting on the ground like someone who's run a race. Nita sagged, covered her face, bent over double, right to the ground, struggling for breath. Eventually she began to recover, but she put off moving or opening her eyes. The book had warned that spelling had its prices, and one of them was the physical exhaustion that goes along with any large, mostly mental work of creation. Nita felt as if she had just been through about 100 English tests with essay questions, one after another. Kit, she said, worried by his silence. Kit said, and rolled over into a sort of crouch, holding his head in his hands. Oh, turn off the sun. And that's where I stopped. So, yes. This is nuts, and I love it. So thank you so much, Devin, for making me read this. I just don't. Kevin's saying, no! I'm sorry, Devin. I didn't mean to make you sad. But if it was like right at that spot. But yeah, Devin, thank you. If anybody else is interested in me continuing this, I sure fucking want to read more. So, you guys can commission that. unspoiledpodcast.com/shop. But there is like, I've only been talking about this. I'm at an hour talking by myself about this opening section. So there was a lot happening, a lot. And it's just so different. And it's so different from other things I've read. And it's just so different than what I expected based on the fact that it's like, seems to be geared towards kids and the cover art seems to be geared towards kids. Like, this is serious. It's not as heavy as some of the Dresden Files stuff yet in terms of just sheer bloodiness. It can be very graphic and like gory at times, but it's really heavy in terms of like the implications of everything, the complexity of the magic, the complexity of the kind of mentality that you have to have in order to make it work, and how much you have to hold in your mind as a reader as everything is happening and understand. Jumping through perspectives, like with her having a moment where it's like she's dreaming and she's dreaming of a thing that hasn't happened yet. That's a lot for kids to take in, like I'm not sure that I would really have understood what was happening there if I was reading this years and years ago. So yeah, it's just really wild, and it's just so unexpected. And I always like being surprised, because I don't even want to say it's hard to surprise me. It's just, it's rarer now that I do this for a living. I am exposed to so much more media that I can see things coming sometimes, and I'll know like what direction or trope they're going to use here. And, so there's still plenty of things that surprise me, but it's, you have to be much more choosy about what you delve into. And that's why I have you guys to show me where to delve. So I really appreciate y'all picking this one up. And when I posted in the group that Devin had commissioned this, there were like 3 other people who were like, oh my God, I love these books, and I didn't know anybody else even read them. I'm so excited right now. And I want you guys to talk about stuff like that more, like things that you all love, because I think that's part of what's great about like the patrons group on Unspoiled, is that it's a place where you can nerd out and people will know what the fuck you're talking about. That's like, that's what the internet is great for. It's something that I feel like people slag on the whole idea of social media and whatnot and act like it's this evil that we need to overcome. But it's also amazing because you get to connect with people over something that means a lot to you that you thought you were alone in loving. And conceptually, you can't be alone because these books are selling and they're being published and they're still out there, so other people must be reading them. But finding out who reads them, and if they are as crazy about them as you are, is way harder. And I just think about like what the Harry Potter fandom was like before the internet really became a thing, and you really only met other Potter lovers by going to like the midnight book releases, where other people who were as devoted as you would go for the book release at midnight and be in costume and things like that. And there were like conventions, but those were rarer. Those are a much more common thing now. And so the internet is just so cool for like not only being able to share with people who love the same things as you, but then you now have a community of people that you trust because you know that they love things that you also love, who when they say, check out this thing, you already have a level of trusting their judgment on it. And it makes it so much more worth your while to delve into that stuff, which is such a big part of why I wanted to do the Spoil Me commission series in the first place, was that I really trust my listeners, and despite dirty jobs for the book club, but there are so many things that I couldn't possibly devote an entire feed to and start a whole podcast about, yet I really want to read them because people that I know and love are telling me this is really good, I swear. And I'm like, I believe you, but there's nothing I can do about that right now besides read it on my own, and I don't necessarily have the free time to do that. So this is so perfect because it's just like, people being able to target exactly the thing that they want me to cover. And I'm finding out some really cool stuff that I don't know when I would have been able to get around to reading any of this. So thank you all a ton. Devin, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you commissioning this, and I'm really loving it so far. If there's anybody else out there who's interested in commissioning one, again, it's on spoiledpodcast.com/shop. And I have 2 more spoiled episodes coming up, Spoil Me episodes, where they're both for Veronica Mars, episodes 1 and 2. So I'm really excited about that because that was something that I had for one episode 1 got commissioned, and then right after that person commissioned it, another person came out and also commissioned it. And I was like, is it cool if we do the second one? Because somebody already got that first one. Oh, Megan's here. Megan's the one who commissioned it. Hey, Megan. So yeah, we're going to be doing 1 and 2, and I'm really, really excited about that because Veronica Mars is another one that I was like, I would like to cover this, but God, I don't know when I'm going to get to it. And it's so already 1 and 2, guys, we're on our way. And if you're interested in collaborating with other listeners so that you guys can join in and get me to read like a whole series or watch a whole series, go to facebook.com/groups/spoilmepod. And you guys, I'm going to try and make like a different thread for each series. If you join the group and then search for the title, hopefully, I think this is how it should work. It will come up and you'll be able to see the thread with people commenting, I commissioned this episode, and we'll be able to keep track that way. We don't get double ups of people. Because for the most part, I think nobody will really have a problem with, I commissioned episode 1, but that's taken. So that'll just be for number 2. But there might be times where somebody really was only going to pay for me to watch a specific episode. And if it's not that exact one, then they might want their money back and use that to do something else. So I'd like to avoid that kind of confusion. So check that out, facebook.com/groups/spoilmepod. And I'm really excited. This is so cool. So thank you guys all for coming. I had a pretty good little audience this time around. And thank you, Devin, for being here and talking me through some of the stuff that I maybe didn't understand or wasn't sure whether I should know what that meant. And thank you, Megan, for commissioning Megan and Nancy, who commissioned episodes 1 and 2 of Veronica Mars. So you guys can stay tuned for that. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do them this week because LeakyCon is going to be coming up. So I'm going to look at my schedule and I would like to do them, but I can't really guarantee that. So it might not be until next week. I'll keep you guys posted. But I'm totally excited to start that. So, yay! All right, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. It really means a lot that you come out and chat with me about everything. Devin says I'll probably commission the next 50 around the end of this month. That's amazing, Devin. No pressure. And like I said, I'll post it in the group like somebody else might want to. So, we'll see. And you guys are great, and I love you. And with that, I will do my traditional sign-off, which is toodaloo, motherfuckers. Bye, everybody.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.